You open this door with the key of reason. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of truth, a dimension of freedom, a dimension of joy. You're moving into the land of both the ideal and the real, of the possible and the actual. You've just crossed over into the Capitalist Corner.
Where reason meets reality, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Welcome to the Capitalist Corner, everybody. I, of course, am your host, Michael Liebowitz, and today we have on the author of the book, The Case Against Government Intervention in the Marketplace, Unwarranted Intrusions. He's an American author who writes about finance and political economy. He's been referred to as the Dean of High-Yield Debt. He earned the bachelor's cum laude in history from Harvard in 1974. He also attended Harvard Business School the following semester. He graduated in 1976 with an M.B.A. He was awarded the Chartered Financial Analyst designation in 1982. He's perfect for this program. Marty Fridson, welcome to the Capitalist Corner.
Terrific to be here.
So I met you through a mutual friend, Gene Epstein, and he told me that I had to interview you, and he insisted that I read your book first, so he lent it to me. That was a little over a month ago, and I have gotten it. I did read it, but it was written, I believe, in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. So I want to address the subjects that you addressed, but I want to make them up to date and bring them into our current context. So the first concept that I think is very relevant to what we're discussing, because it serves as the justification or the alleged justification for so many intrusions into the marketplace, and that is the idea of market failure. So what is the idea of market failure, and how is it used to justify government intervention?
Okay. The idea of market failure is that you rely first of all, on prices established by arm's length transactions between individuals, and you come up with an efficient allocation of resources, desirable kind of economic outcome. But there are a few, shortcomings of the system, and the one classic example is the free rider problem, as exemplified in national defense. In other words, the government, assuming we agree that national defense is worthwhile, useful and important even, unfortunately, the government cannot protect you without also protecting me. So my incentive is to, hey, let Michael pay for it. And so the government in that situation has to step in and say, well, no, everyone is required to pay. It's not a matter of you're having the choice, as in any other kind of good or service that you might want. The government really does have to step in here. The other classic example is externalities. So you have a company that's producing chemicals that are demanded and needed in the economy. That's not a problem, but they're dumping the waste that's resulting from the production of those chemicals into a river nearby their plant, and that's causing expense for everybody else. In other words, the company that's producing that pollution isn't paying for the cleanup of it, but it's externalizing that, forcing that expense on the rest of the population. So this is another rationale that's advanced. And I think that you'd see a pretty wide agreement in principle on those kind of ideas among economists across the ideological spectrum. The difference is how many market failures do you see? And I think those on the more progressive populist side as well would say, well, if there are unequal outcomes among people, that in itself is a market failure. And more conservative, libertarian economists would say, well, no, that's to be expected. It's not a problem inherently, and there's no need for an intervention there. So that's kind of the landscape when you talk about the whole idea of interventions and market failures.
One of the market failures that you mentioned, just to give an example that I thought was very interesting, was the QWERTY setup on a typewriter and now, on the computer. What was their beef with that, and why were they wrong? If you even remember. I mean, I know you wrote the book a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem with it was, as perceived, is that, well, this isn't very intuitive. It was a sort of carried over from the printers when they were still setting type physically, and they had little boxes with the different letters in them and so on. And somehow they'd come up with that particular arrangement. But if you're typing formerly on a typewriter and nowadays on a computer screen where they use that same, QWERTY across the top, and say, well, that doesn't make much sense. And, you have your right digit, index finger on the J, which is hardly the most widely used letter. So to some people, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. The question is, do we need federal legislation to control that sort of thing? I mean, if it really is such an awful system, then let people say, well, we'd prefer a different thing. When I see professional typists who are able to do 90 words or more a minute, I say, well, it doesn't seem to be failing in a major way. And I don't type at that kind of a speed, but I don't find it difficult. I learned typing in junior high school, and it seems to have worked fine for me all this time.
So one of the interventions that you talked about were subsidies. Now, there's, in my mind at least, oftentimes what are referred to as subsidies are letting people keep more of their own money. So a tax break is sometimes referred to as a subsidy. But there's also direct cash subsidies, right, where they actually give loans, or the government invests, as Trump recently did in Intel, I think it's called. So I guess in clear language, what is a subsidy, and where do we see them today in the economy? And what are the effects of these subsidies?
Yeah. Well, I would say, as a generalization, the effects are bad. They result in inefficient uses of resources. They're justified, and they may be outright cash grants to businesses. To say, well, if you locate your business here, we'll provide some sort of government service to you at no cost to you. So that is, even if I'm not handing you cash, that is an economic incentive that's coming from somebody else's pocket. I mean, anyway, you put it in. And the idea is that somehow this is going to help the economic development here. The reality is that this is an outgrowth of the political system, where there's an incentive to buy influence. That can be done legally, not necessarily through outright bribes, but it may be through campaign contributions or some other method. It's really the government putting the thumb on the scale, trying to pick winners, and that just works out badly. Again, it's also for the benefit of particular interests. It's presented as, oh, this is a general benefit. This is going to help economy, create jobs, and so on. When you start looking more closely at them, they tend not to work out very well. The tax breaks, and I know that is a controversial thing. I've mentioned this, and I've gotten pushback and say, well, that's not really a subsidy, because the government shouldn't be taking our money in taxes to begin with. So if we're getting a break on that, that's an improvement. But when that's distributed unequally, it is also putting the thumb on the scale. So it's saying, let's give a tax break to have companies come and locate here in our state, which gives the companies the ability to play one state or city off against another, and really create a less fair tax system because they're getting breaks that the local hair salon can't get. They can't pick up and move to another state to get that tax benefit, but a large corporation that is going to locate a headquarters or a factory can get millions and millions in that way.
So one area where the government's been involved in subsidies, I think going back to at least the 1920s, is farm subsidies. What is the reasoning behind this? And like, it's still continuing to this day, over 100 years, I think, after it started. It may even started sooner. I might be off a little bit, but how do they justify this, and what actually occurs because of it?
Yeah, well, excellent question. And actually, some of this was put in place during World War I, and perhaps an argument could be made that it was necessary to maintain wartime production. That's debatable whether it was necessary in the first place. But as Ronald Reagan said, nothing is more permanent than a temporary government program, and they continued. And I think basically the reason it continued is that there's a sort of sentimental idea about the farm. I remember hearing the phrase when I was growing up, the farmers are the backbone of the country. Well, in 1789, when we got started, 98% of the population was on farms, and that was a fair statement. Now it's down below 2% is employed. And look, the farmers are entitled to any other benefits of society, but to get this special subsidy saying, well, we're going to support the prices of the farm goods higher than consumers would pay if it were really just a free market. We're going to support dairy prices. And this is a great example of the bad consequences of it. Here in the United States, one of the most affluent countries, we have a vitamin D deficiency among the elderly who need it because they cannot afford these dairy goods. And that's a direct result of the price supports that are provided by the government. I live in one of the most liberal congressional districts in the United States on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And when I've talked about my book and some of the ideas in it to my neighbors, I point out another form of the farm subsidies, which is to support the prices by dumping our agricultural goods on developing countries, which makes it impossible for farmers in those countries to make a living because they can't compete with the basically free stuff that's being sent into their country. And as I say, I think my most liberal neighbors say, well, no, that's not good. So the idea is, it's presented as, oh, don't we have to help the farmers? They're so important and they're so beleaguered. Well, there are fewer of them because farming is much more efficient than it was. It's mechanized. We have other ways of improving the output. So it's natural that the labor should move from the agricultural sector to other parts of the economy where it's more needed.
We're going to see, I think the pattern is whenever the government thinks they're going to help something, they intervene and screw things up. Now, the next area I want to talk about, I can't for the life of me fathom why anybody thinks the government needs to be funding the arts. And then they get to decide what's art and what's not art. And, I don't trust these people to decide what the speed limit should be. Never mind what I should appreciate it as art and what I should be funding, but they do it nonetheless. How long have they been doing that? And why? Yeah,
well, the big development that I think goes back to the Eisenhower administration. We had the National Endowment for the Arts and the humanities, and I think there was an idea at the time, well, that culture, uh, art, literature, music, are important. They make the quality of life better, and I don't certainly disagree with any of that. I don't think too many people would. But the problem, I think you put your finger on it, is who decides what is art, and then we, I'm being taxed for art forms that I would never have an interest in viewing. Not that they're bad; they're just not my personal preference. And in other kinds of economic activity, I pay for the goods, the type of food, the type of clothes that I want to have. And I'm perfectly fine if people want to eat other kinds of things, wear different types of clothes. If there are enough of those people willing to pay enough, those goods will be produced. And things of which there's no or very minimal support are just not going to get produced. And I think that's a good outcome. With the arts, once you get the government involved, you may get production of art that really nobody is interested in, except those producing it who are able to get the political influence to get that done. But the other problem that comes about it is that art becomes quite controversial. There have been art that people have considered obscene, blasphemous. That's not a problem. You don't have to consume or participate in that art if you don't approve it. But I think you have a legitimate complaint if you're saying, well, my tax dollars are being used to support that. Much of the art then also becomes embroiled in political controversies that they're viewed as this liberal virtue signaling sort of stuff that I object to. And I think legitimately people on the left side of the spectrum say, well, this is propaganda that I disapprove of. Those are all valid opinions. And the question is just, should the government, again, be picking the winners there in this field?
It seems like it creates perverse incentives also, as much of this stuff does, because if I want to make money as an artist, I need to then there's it seems to me it would how do I want to put this, diminish sort of the spontaneity of art or the creativity aspect, because I'm trying to cater to what is going to get me funded rather than what is actually art. And then, of course, it is going to come down to, well, who decides what is art? Is that a problem? Does that occur where people adjust art in order to get subsidies rather than just produce it?
Yeah, I think that's inevitable, because rather than having art go on exhibit and having people come or not come to that exhibition, producing play and having people decide to buy a ticket to attend that play or not. Inevitably, if it's the government doling out the money for it, then there has to be a czar or a committee, and that's just not going to work. I think it's doomed. The idea of art by committee, I think it's just an absurd idea, to expect that you're going to have desirable outcomes. And I think it's then subject to the individual or a small group who may be part of a group think and have their particular ideas of art. And those may be very valid ideas, but it's not as desirable an outcome as having the public at large decide what they find most desirable.
I've often heard that, in addition to the American economy, or with the capitalist economy being a roller coaster, that the stock market is especially volatile. Three interventions that I want to talk about are the bans on short selling, or the rules against short selling or limiting short selling, rules against insider trading. And then I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that stocks are ultimately taxed twice, one at the corporate level and then again at the dividend level. Now, when it comes to short selling, I think it was Benjamin Anderson in his book on the economics during the early 1920s or early to mid 1920s. And he hypothesized that bans on short selling actually allowed the market to drop further than it would have, because if short selling were allowed, there would have been the incentive to buy before they went lower, because then they could resell. But are these bad laws, rules that inhibit short selling, rules that stop insider trading, and the sort of double taxation? Perhaps explain them a little bit better than I'm capable of, and then tell me what the effects of these things are.
Yeah. Well, the short selling wound up getting the blame, or a large part of the blame, larger certainly than deserved, for the stock market crash in 1929. There were multiple factors going in, giving rise to that. But after the fact, they said, oh, it was those bad guys like Joseph Kennedy and these others who were selling short, and that forced the market to go down. No, short selling, just for those who may not be familiar, is the idea that you can sell a stock without owning it, and you borrow the shares from someone who does own it. You pay a fee to borrow those shares. You deliver those shares to the buyer of it. But because you don't already own the stock, you are hoping that the stock will go down. That's your expectation. And you can then buy it later. So instead of buying it and then selling it at a profit, you're selling it and then buying it below the price at which you sell it and making a profit that way. Short selling is essential to having prices at the right level. And that is one of the desirable effects of a stock market. The stock market is setting the price of capital in the economy, or equity capital, the ownership of the companies. And if you don't have the ability to sell short, that there's no way to restrain prices from getting excessive. So it's very valuable to have investors who are focusing on short selling and looking not for bargains, stocks that are undervalued, which is very important, but stocks that are temporarily overvalued for some reason, and bringing them back into line with the correct level and the appropriate price. So because the short sellers were stigmatized, there were all these ideas, well, we have to just outlaw it altogether. That didn't happen. There were restrictions put on the ability to sell short. You do want to prevent market manipulation. And if short selling is done in a way that is combined with circulating rumors, inducing people to sell not on genuine information, but creating false stories and getting them around the market, that you certainly want to prevent and hold people to account if they engage in that kind of behavior. But the basic idea of saying, well, I should be able to sell it and buy it back later, it is certainly legitimate and necessary for an efficient market.
And what about insider trading?
Okay, this is again something very stigmatized, and the great villains presented as having engaged in that. And it's basically the idea of let's say I'm a director of a corporation or someone involved in very sensitive operations within the company, and we know that if there's going to be an announcement, perhaps drug that a pharmaceutical company has been working on, and they've gone through trials, and there are very good results that indicate that a likelihood that drug will progress to getting approval for sale to the public. And knowing that, I buy the stock I have an advantage over other people who don't have that information, and therefore I make a profit that's unjustified. Well, what people don't talk about is the other side of the story. So let's imagine the proverbial widow and young daughter who's college education she's planning to fund by prudently investing, and she buys the pharmaceutical stock, and unbeknownst to her, there has been a discovery of a very terrible side effect of that drug that's going to force it to be withdrawn from the market. That's known to people inside the company, but is not reflected in the stock price. The woman buys that stock, and then the next day, this revelation is made, and the stock is down 30%. She suffered a serious loss. It's going to be a real setback to her college funding planning. So it's not entirely clear that it's a bad thing for information that has an impact on the value of the stock not to be reflected in the market. So it's, I think, something that warrants further study, and rather than just saying, well, this is automatically a bad thing if information gets into the market. The whole idea of the stock market is supposed to be that the stock price today will reflect all of the information that's relevant to it. And that's kind of an ideal really to be aiming for rather than trying to prevent.
And how about the double taxation? Would you even consider that an intervention, or is that just standard? I don't know how else to say it, but
there are other ways of organizing the tax system, and the complaint is basically that yes, a company makes a profit of $100 million, it pays the corporate tax rate on those earnings, then pays dividends to its stockholders, and lo and behold, they have to pay a comparable personal income tax rate on those dividends. And one effect of that is that it makes it less efficient from a tax standpoint to pay dividends, and that does at some level push companies in the direction of using more debt to finance their operations rather than stock. Now, they're always going to have some mixture of the two, and it's not a bad thing that they borrow some money. That is a way of raising the overall return to their shareholders, and that can be a very positive thing. But to the extent that the way the tax system is oriented might push companies too far in the direction, if they take on too much debt, that creates risk, ultimately possibly even resulting in bankruptcy of the company, which is going to be very harmful to the shareholders. So I think that really not having that double taxation would have overall positive benefits. Now, you have to raise revenue through taxes. I would say it would be a good thing at this point if the government would find ways to spend less and not have to raise as much in taxes. But one way or another, you're going to have some expensive government, have some need for revenue. And one reform that ought to be looked at is cutting back or eliminating that double taxation on dividends.
In your book, you wrote a lot about problems in the housing market. And I thought it was interesting because this, of course, was before the 2008 collapse. Do you see any trouble today in the housing market? For instance, we have Trump just recently came out and said he wants to take $250 million or $1 billion and invest it, take it from Fannie and Freddie and direct to invest it in the housing market. He's now talking about how he wants to keep housing prices up to benefit current owners. He, of course, wants the Fed to get interest rates low. Do you see anything that they're doing currently, even stuff that I didn't just mention, that's going on in the housing market that troubles you?
Yeah, well, one other thing very recent is that Trump has said, I want to outlaw institutional ownership of single family houses, with the idea being, oh, the reason that younger people aren't able to become homeowners is that all the houses have been bought up by these big financial institutions and turned into rental properties. It's a very tiny part of the total picture. And most of those rental properties that are single family homes are owned by much smaller investors. That's not the reason that there's a home ownership problem. Currently, interest rates have gone up. Now, they're not as high as the 14% that prevailed when I first became a homeowner, but they are up from a recent period. So at the margin, that has made it more difficult to buy homes. But I think the most serious problem in that is that we went through probably a decade or so of just not building enough homes. For various reasons, the companies engaged in home building were not looking to build the starter homes, the likely first purchase of a young family that might upgrade to a larger home later on as their income rises, but just getting the foot in the door with that initial home purchase, it really become out of sight. But what the government is looking to do is, at this point, the measures they're taking are not real solutions to that problem. It's also the case that home ownership has become synonymous with the American dream. Very wrong-headed. The American dream, which I'm a great believer in, I feel that my family, I personally have lived the American dream, been able to get an education, work hard, save, and have a good lifestyle. And this was the promise of America that my grandparents saw when they came here. It wasn't, owning a home is a desirable outcome, but there are other countries that have comparable home ownership rates, about 2/3 of the population, without deductibility of mortgage interest, without the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that you mentioned, but politically the idea is around, if it's anything less than 100% home ownership, that's a problem. Well, in reality, some of those families should be investing in their children's education. Home ownership is not as essential if they're looking to really live the American dream and see their children go further than they have themselves. So it really has become an issue, like with the farmers, where sentiment and popular impressions of it have taken over a really hard-nosed economic analysis of the issue.
The last thing I want to talk to you about is Social Security. So what is it? What are some common misconceptions about it, and what are the problems with it?
Okay, the real problem is that and the misconception, the misrepresentation is that it's a social insurance program. That's how it was sold, saying, well, this is going to be controlled by the government, but it's just as if you were buying a policy and that was going to pay you income in your old age when you're retired, and so on. But it's never been that. From the outset, it was a pay-as-you-go system. So the current workers are getting part of their income deducted to pay those who were retired. And that was really from the very beginning, when no money had been paid in. So there's idea that there's this trust fund and the money is being invested there, and this is paying for the future workers. That's really never been the case. So the actuarial problems, the funding of it arise from that basic fact that it's not really a sound system where you're paying in and and providing for the future income of the retired people. This is very unfair to the younger workers. If you're in a smaller generation, you're being taxed effectively, calling it a deduction for Social Security, but in fact, it's a tax, and that's to support the people going before you. So that's a generational inequity that really is wrong, and that I think young people need to be out there speaking up and voting to make sure they're heard and they're not disadvantaged, or that they can go against and fight that advantage that they're facing through that generational inequity. The funding is not really bad. It's always easier to say, well, we'll keep the benefits where they are. We won't have it adequately funded. The real solution would be to say, all right, if we want to maintain Social Security, we should take the unfunded benefit, what's coming up within a disturbingly short period of time is going to bankrupt the system. We say, all right, let's take those benefits that are not funded, allocate the money to fund those, and then going forward, make it a genuine system where the money is being taken from your paycheck, put into a fund for your cohort, people born in your year, invested in a mixture of stocks and bonds. And, rather than having the government guaranteeing that, saying, well, we're believing that the economy will function well enough that the investment in the private sector will pay for that ultimately. If those returns aren't there, there isn't going to be money to pay people anyway. If the economy performs so poorly that doesn't work with a responsibly managed system, the money isn't going to be there. So I would be very confident for my children, grandchildren going into that sort of a system if it's set up properly.
Now, how much do you enjoy arguing with Gene Epstein?
Well, I have a lot of fun. We're very good friends. We go back a number of years, and as he and I both agree, we agree the vast majority of issues. And certainly on the basic idea of having the market settle most of the economic issues, and to have much less need for government intervention than I think is widely accepted today. My issue is really that I think there are people representing themselves as libertarians that you can see on social media, on QWERTY and Reddit. You can look up some of these ideas that you mentioned speed limits, and I'd say, all right, well, that's a reasonable issue. There are people who are very hung up on speed bumps as an issue, which I don't think is the most important. There are arguments you can make about it, but then you get into some, I think, stuff that is really going to turn off potential people who potentially would support a lot of libertarian ideas, where they're saying, oh, here are people who want to legalize dueling. And I'd say, well, okay, I understand the argument. I don't think it would be a good idea to do that. And believe it or not, and I apologize because this is going to really shock some people, but you have people seriously arguing that we should legalize consensual cannibalism. And this is the idea, well, here's a person who has a desire for that, and someone else who's terminally ill. Well, the one person can lawfully pay the other $10,000 and say, after you're dead, I can eat your body. And I'd say this is, really icky kind of stuff even to talk about. But when you see that sort of thing online, I think that responsible libertarians should be saying, well, look, those are not primary issues for us. There are a lot of important economic issues and issues of genuine personal freedom that are far more important. And, we're not, you don't have to buy into all of that other stuff to agree with us on those ideas, the kind of ideas that Gene and I see eye to eye on, really.
All right, Marty, where can people find you?
Well, the book, Unwarranted Intrusions, is available on Amazon, or perhaps other sellers may also have it available. So I encourage you to. It is, again, a book that came out 20 years ago, but I think that the basic ideas are still hold, and there are new applications, new problems, offenses, being created by governments at the federal, state, and local level. But I think you can relate a lot of what's going on now to the basic ideas presented in the book. And I write pieces, particularly now for Reuters.com. A lot of those are more financially related, but sometimes get into the kinds of issues that are addressed in that book as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to be with us today.
Yeah, it was really delightful.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so
Terrific,
much.
and best of luck and continue your great work with this podcast.
Thank you so much. For now, this is the Capitalist Corner. Calling it quits for now. Check your premises if you need to. You probably do. Take care.
All righty.